Howdy my totally as always Tubular gamers, we're back with another video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. We have another end of year list. Today we're going to be looking at the most disappointing games of 2023. Now I like to keep things pretty positive, pretty upbeat on the channel. I always talk about the best this or best that or some of my favorite games of the year, but today we are not doing that. Today we're going to be looking at what personally disappointed me. This list is in no particular order. These are just games that I walked away from being disappointed. Now, I'm going to put a huge preface because I'm sure plenty of people are already typing in the comments. Just because a game is disappointing does not mean I think it's a bad game. In fact, I'll just immediately say there are a couple games on this list that I think are good, but I still walked away from them disappointed for a variety of reasons, whether it's them not living up to their potential or maybe the predecessor was just so much better. There's a couple reasons why I would be disappointed with a game. Again, I'm not saying all these games are bad and not worth playing. It's just what I personally was disappointed by, and I'm going to try to explain to you why I'm disappointed. I also am but one man. I have not played every game that came out in 2023. Like, I didn't play MW3. I've played all the games on this list though. Hopefully I made that clear. I'm sure y'all are still going to flame me though. So with that in mind, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of these games down below, what some disappointing games are for you. Or maybe let me know some of the most disappointing games you've ever played. I'm always reading the comments, so let me know down below. We've got a super thanks and Patreon going on as well. Any support truly is greatly appreciated. Like, seriously, I really do appreciate it, and I really can just immediately say thank you all for watching even 30 seconds of this video. It means a lot. And so let's get right into it. Let's talk about the first disappointing game. Now, the first game, I don't think it needs much of an introduction. Here we have the Lord of the Rings Golem, which is very well documented as one of the worst games of 2023. In fact, it was just so bad that the developers just straight stopped making games. They've just closed down the studio part, which is sad. I don't like to see any studio get shut down, but this game, yeah, it really did them no favors. Now, you might be saying, man, did this game really disappoint you? Like, were you really expecting this game to be good, or are you just talking about it because it's one of the worst games of the year? No, I genuinely was disappointed. I wasn't like crazy hyped for this game, but I like Golem. I love Lord of the Rings. I expected this game to be, just a decent little B-tier game. Sure, it didn't have a huge studio or the biggest production, and the game's graphics were subpar at best, but I still, was hoping it'd be a decent little Lord of the Rings spin-off about one of the most iconic characters in the series, and instead what we got was not that. We got one of the worst things I've played all year. With dreadful visuals, awful gameplay, half-baked mechanics, and you have really one of the most unfun experiences you could have with a video game. This game is depressing, it is sad, not just because of how shite the game is, but the game itself is dark and depressing. It's about Golem living in this prison, being tortured, forced to work for the orcs. Like, it sucks, it's sad, and I was just like, dude, I almost feel bad for this little goblin. Okay, Tolkien Loris, I know he's not a goblin, it's just a figure of speech, I promise. This game, though, it really is depressing, it is sad. The gameplay is the opposite of fun, and it simply was just not good in like any aspect. The platforming was terrible, the controls were awful, the objectives were either broken or just tedious and repetitive. The game felt stale pretty much immediately. The stealth mechanics are awful. The game's pacing and flow is just terrible. It drags on way too long. It's dragging on from the first hour, and I just could not bring myself to finish this game. Like, I really did try, but I was like, oh, this just isn't worth it. I mean, Lego 2K Drive just came out. I think I'm gonna play that instead, and I haven't gone back to the game, and I don't ever plan on going back to the game. It's just awful. It's like maybe the worst Lord of the Rings game of them all, and the game shouldn't be played by anybody. Look, I wasn't expecting greatness. I wasn't expecting, Lord of the Rings Two Towers quality or anything, but I was expecting something better than this. I wasn't expecting it to be this bad. It's a real shame. Games should not be this awful with today's technology, but here we are with Lord of the Rings Golem. And so our next game is Crash Team Rumble. Now, I will start by just saying I love Crash Bandicoot, one of my favorite series ever. I've played through all of the games several times. Like, I truly do love Crash. And so when I saw this game get announced and what it was, I immediately was like, oh no, this is going to be some awful online-only live service monetization-heavy multiplayer game that'll make it 6 months and get shut down. And thankfully, it's not that bad. The game still does go online and there is an active community here, but it's hard to feel anything but disappointment for this game. Like, I wasn't really expecting much, but after playing this game for a few hours, especially at launch, I was just like, this is it? This is the whole game? what we have is ultimately just a really shallow multiplayer game with very little depth, and I don't think the core gameplay is fun enough to keep people hooked for more than even a few hours. And I'm sure there are plenty of people that have played a ton of this game. I'm not denying that. It's just me personally, I wasn't able to play more than a few hours. I was like, yeah, it's a fun little game mode, but I would like some more, please. More depth, more characters, more maps, more game modes particularly. And yeah, they've been adding more over the last 6 months, but in my opinion, it's a little too late. This game really, and I mean really, should have launched with more than one game mode. Like if it launched with even 2, it would have been better. I also think some form of single player content would have been best, since that is Crash's primary audience. But I realize at this point I might be asking for too much, since it is pretty clear that most of the assets are from Crash 4 and there isn't a lot of original stuff here, so it's clear they're working with a small team and not a lot of resources, and probably did the best they could. And you know, for that, Toys for Bob, I congratulate you. Kudos, you did get the game out, and at least you have a semi-fun product here. It's a shame that I just really couldn't stick with it. Like, I think this game, it just needed more. And on top of that, there just wasn't much incentive to keep playing. Like, there was a battle pass and it had unlockables, there was some customization, but I don't know, I just didn't really care for this. I don't really like battle passes in games in general, but that's also because I switch between so many games and am constantly playing through stuff, so that's more of a me issue. But didn't care for the battle pass, didn't care for the monetization at all. And I thought the customization was just kind of like, you know, before this game came out, I wondered why it wasn't just free to play and filled to the brim with microtransactions, and I still kind of wonder that. This game would have a much bigger audience if it was free to play. Now, I don't have any specific numbers or examples, but I can't imagine a lot of people are still playing this game, and I still very much worry that by this time next year, the game will be shut down. And I don't want that. I don't think any Crash fan wants that, because we don't want to see Crash fail and go into purgatory for like another 10 years. We want Crash to thrive and we want to get more games, but not like this. I don't want games like this. I want good old single player Crash Bandicoot. And so our next game is Infinity Strash Dragon Quest The Adventure of Dai. Now, I am working on a Dragon Quest video right now. I'll have that soon enough, and that'll go over a lot of the finer points of this game. But to generalize it, I did not hear much about this game pre-release or post-release, and what little I did see was pretty negative, and that wasn't a good sign. But after playing through this game myself, yeah, it's pretty hard to not be disappointed by this game. I don't think this game is like awful. I don't think it's the worst Dragon Quest game ever like some people were saying, but it's certainly one of the weakest Dragon Quest games I've ever played. It seems like a miracle we even got this game, as it had a really long development cycle, way longer than it should have. And the end result is pretty like, this isn't one of the worst games I played all year, but it's certainly not one of the best. This game is the definition of a mixed bag. You know, it follows the adventure of Dai, and it goes through the first half of Dai's story. If you're unfamiliar with it, it is a Dragon Quest anime / manga, and it's totally unique, and it's actually really popular in Japan. It hasn't really seen any popularity over here, unfortunately. This really is some of the only exposure the Western audience has ever had to this story, and this game probably isn't instilling much interest. Look, it wasn't really all that clear what kind of game this was before it came out, and after playing through it, I still don't even really know what to tell you. A majority of the game, you're watching cutscenes, but you're not actually watching cutscenes. You're looking at still images and hearing the characters talk. The pacing and general flow of this game is nothing short of awful. Like, you were just sitting here watching these screens like almost the entire game. A majority of the game is this, watching the screens. You know, when you play a Dragon Ball game or a One Piece game, when they recreate parts of the anime or the manga, you actually get to see it recreated in real time with in-game graphics. And this game does it a few times, but 9 times out of 10, you're just staring at these screens. And while I think the story is good and the characters are great, the storytelling just sucks. There's no other way to put it. Like, it just sucks. I don't want to watch the story this way. I might as well just go read the manga myself if it's going to be told to me this way. And the actual gameplay, well, I don't think it's terrible. It's, again, a decent action RPG. It's not great. There's not a lot of depth. There are some satisfying moments. Some of the bosses are really tricky. But I would say you only play this game maybe 25% of the time. Most of the game, you really are just staring at these screens. And I can see why so many people immediately just turn this game off, because in the first like 5 hours, I think I played less than half an hour of gameplay. And it's a shame, because the art's pretty awesome. The presentation as a whole is actually pretty decent for a Square Enix game that isn't Final Fantasy. And I think this game could have been a hell of a lot better. Maybe if the pacing was better, there was more gameplay, the gameplay was a little bit more fleshed out. This game, it really could have been a hidden gem and something special in the Dragon Quest series. But here I am telling you that a lot of people are calling this the worst Dragon Quest game ever, and you know, it's not hard to see why people are saying that. And while I don't think the game is the worst one ever, it's really hard to say this game is anything but a disappointment. Like, it should have been more, it should have been better, and we should have had more regular cutscenes. Like, I guess I'm never going to take regular cutscenes for granted again after how many still images I've stared at in this game. I really doubt this game is going to do well commercially, and so Dai's story, I guess, will just never get finished, which is a real shame. Alright, and here's the game that's probably going to get all the pitchforks and torches thrown at me. Here we have Starfield. I'll just immediately say I think Starfield is a good game. I would say it's even in my top 40 games of the year, but it really pains me to say that I think this game is a disappointment. One of the bigger disappointments of this year. Now, I love Fallout 3, I really love Fallout 4, I love Skyrim and Oblivion to death, and unfortunately, all of those games are better than this game. This game just feels like a big step backwards for Bethesda in so many different aspects. It got a few things right graphically. I think it's pretty good. The shooting, it's definitely the best shooting a Bethesda game's ever had. It doesn't hold a candle to most modern first-person shooters, but it's pretty decent. The world building, yeah, it's okay, and some of the characters are all right, but the quest design, the actual moment-to-moment gameplay itself, the AI, the open worlds, the planets, how empty the game is, how underutilized the space combat and exploration is, how the game fails to really live up to its own potential when it comes to the planets, how the game is the opposite of immersive, how there's just way too many loading screens and the game is way too segmented, the terrible, like seriously straight up terrible bounty system, just how unimaginative all of your objectives are. And really, it's a shame how you can just see so much more creativity with the quests, the weapons, the enemies, the characters in Fallout 4, in Skyrim, in Oblivion. Like, there was a ton of creativity. It was memorable, it was fun, it was interesting, it was engaging, you wanted to play hours on end, you wanted to just go off into a direction and go find new random stuff. This game, no, you don't get that like at all. If you do that on one of the main planets, you might find the occasional side objective, and if you do that on any of the random planets, you will find nothing. You will find nothing out there, and it's a real shame. It is a real shame that this game is what it is. It should have been so much more. Like, this game, it has a ton of potential. It absolutely had the potential to be better than Skyrim and Fallout and all of those, and it just squanders it. It does not at all come close to those games, and I honestly have way more interest in going back to Skyrim for the 50th time or playing through Fallout 4 again than I have any interest in playing Starfield again. Like, this game just does not do it for me, and if you love the game, it's one of your favorite games of the year, congrats, but that's not me. While I think the game is good, even great in some aspects, it really pains me to say that this game was just a big disappointment for me. And here we have a game you might have forgot even came out. We have the Dark Pictures Switchback VR, which came out for the PS VR2 earlier this year. Now, I don't have a VR2. I actually played this game at the Insomniac Games office, and I'll just be real, this game ain't selling me on a VR2. It absolutely is not doing that. I walked away from this immediately disappointed and just like, why did they make this game? Like, why call it the Dark Pictures, you know? The Dark Pictures anthology games are these like borderline interactive movies that are usually slow burns that are tense, scary, have an interesting story, are compelling, and usually a pretty crazy ending where you'll make a bunch of different choices and you'll see all of them play out. And so I'm really confused why this game was even made. It's like the exact opposite. It's fast-paced with basically no story. It's not scary. And then they go through a bunch of locations from the first couple games, and I'm just like, why? Why is our character doing this? Why are we here? What is the point to all of this? Are you just here to reuse a bunch of old assets or have some fun callbacks, I guess, to the older games? Like, I don't really understand. The story isn't very good. The game is certainly not scary, and it's a pretty basic short rail shooter. Yeah, it is cool. You can look 365 degrees. They can come at you from any angle and you'll be shooting them all over. And the shooting is half decent, and the controllers are pretty accurate to where you're shooting. There's even a few actually unique gimmicks here where the monsters move if you blink, like the game is tracking your eyes. That is actually really cool, and I think the game should have used more of this. It doesn't, because the game's like 2 to 3 hours long, and there's not much replayability here. There's not really any choices you can make outside of a different ending, and in the end, I just felt kind of empty. I was like, I don't know why this has the Dark Pictures name, and it's a pretty forgettable rail shooter. And I felt like the exact same way about the Until Dawn rail shooter. These games are just not it, man. I love Until Dawn and the Dark Pictures for so many other reasons, and the rail shooters just do not capture them at all. At this time, I wouldn't recommend the PSVR 2 since there just doesn't seem to be a lot of quality titles, and I certainly wouldn't recommend this game to anybody. Not even the biggest fans of the Dark Pictures. Like, just steer clear. And here we have another game that'll probably upset some people. Here we have Counter-Strike 2. Nowadays, I'm not the biggest Counter-Strike guy. Back in high school, I played the shit out of CSGO, I played a ton of Source, and I even played a decent amount of 1.6, so I like Counter-Strike. It's just nowadays my time is occupied by so many other games. But when I heard they were making a Counter-Strike 2, I immediately sat up because I was like, oh snap, Valve's actually making another game, another Counter-Strike, like after like 10 plus years. I didn't think we'd ever get another one. Wow, this is going to be really cool. And then the game released and I immediately was like, wait, this is it? This is Counter-Strike 2? You know, maybe I just went in here with the wrong expectations. Maybe I set myself up for failure, but take a step back and think about it. Think about the jump from 1.6 to Source. Now think about the jump from Counter-Strike Source to Global Offensive. That's a pretty big jump, isn't it? Now think of the jump from Go to 2. Yeah, there really isn't much of a jump at all. The game looks a little nicer. Now, I totally get if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I didn't expect them to come in here and reinvent the wheel, reinvent how Counter-Strike's played, or change up the gunplay or anything like that, but I was expecting a little bit more than this, and in some areas, it feels like a step backwards from Go. And then Valve pulled a Activision Blizzard and just straight nuked Counter-Strike Go, like CSGO, more like CS going away, and now CS gone, because you can't play the game anymore, and I don't like that at all. I like game preservation, and I really just don't think they should have gotten rid of Go in this way. And what we have here, I know plenty of people call the inferior version of Go outside of the graphics. Now, I'm not the biggest Counter-Strike professional, especially not these days, so I can't tell you all the nitty-gritty details in areas where Go was better than 2. I also can't really tell you all that many areas where 2 is way better than Go outside of how the game looks in some new smoke effects. And really, at this point, I'm just like, why call it Counter-Strike 2? Why give people that expectations that's the next big step for Counter-Strike when really it just kind of feels like an update? Like, the perfect analogy for this is when you have a work meeting that could have been an email. This game, it really could have been an email. Like, I just don't see a huge jump here, and with it being called Counter-Strike 2, I expected more than this, you know? That reminds me of Overwatch to Overwatch 2, where I was just sitting here questioning why they even called it Overwatch 2 when so little was added, and it just really felt like an update. And speaking of updates, Valve has been updating the game very regularly, adding in more and more from Go and things that people liked. But at that point, I'm just like, why did they release it then as this? Why did they release it when they did? They should have just waited a little bit to when the game was a bit more beefed up, you know? When you go from Go to 2, I tell you, it is nowhere near as big as Source to Go or CS 1.6 to Source. And that is why I'm disappointed with CS2, and I'm sure I just pissed off the entire Counter-Strike community, but hey, I'm not here to make friends. Unless you want to like, share, comment, subscribe, then I'll be your best friend. And here we have Redfall, a game that I'm sure needs no introduction at this point, the vampire shooter developed by Arcane that unfortunately wasn't received very well and sadly was one of the worst games I played all year. Out of all the games on this list, this game is easily the most disappointing game for me. I was expecting pretty great things from this game, and what we got was a half-baked, unfun, unpolished, poor looter shooter that really just should have been so much better. Like, this game really had potential. It absolutely had potential to be one of the best vampire killing games ever, and now we're sitting here laughing at it 6 months later. And I didn't want that. You didn't want that. I don't think anybody wanted that. We wanted this game to be good. We wanted it to be a fun co-op looter shooter where we just kill a bunch of vampires and have a nice time, and unfortunately, we just didn't get that. Now, they have been updating the game. They recently added 60 FPS to Xbox and have been adding more enemies and trying to make the world more lived in, but in my opinion, just cut your losses. You know, there are plenty of games that have turned it around, like Fallout 76 and No Man's Sky and all of that, but this game does not strike me as a game that can turn it around. Like, the launch was just so bad. You would have to do so much work to try to turn this game's image around, and at that point, I'm really just like, cut your losses and move on to the next game. Take the L and move on, and then make a nice big W. And I hate to say that because, you know, I like Arcane. I really liked Prey, and it's a sad story that the game just isn't very good. Like, the launch was just terrible. This game has so many bad aspects. The story was awful. The world building was terrible. The world itself sucked. Such an empty open world with nothing interesting going on. The vampires weren't interesting. There wasn't enough enemy types. The encounters were boring. The quest design was so unimaginative and boring. The looter mechanics weren't great. The leveling up and RPG aspects were lacking and barely there. The game was stupidly easy throughout. It was honestly just mind-numbing exploring these areas and doing these quests. Like, I couldn't tell you a single quest in this game because they all just felt super generic, unimaginative, uninspired, and then fighting the vampires, these encounters, they just kind of happen. They just kind of happen. You shoot them a few times, you maybe put the stake in them, and that's it. There's really not a lot going on here, and the game just needed a lot more variety. It needed a lot more enemies. It needed some tense areas, a better atmosphere. It just needed an entire overhaul at this this point. On top of that, the game was buggy, there were glitches, the frame rate wasn't great, it launched with 30 FPS on Xbox, the game doesn't look very good. I don't like the art style at all. It kind of reminds me of Fortnite, but it somehow looks worse. This game has like no personality. It feels like it has no soul. It has live service elements, always online. Like, there are just so many things to dislike about this game. I can't even tell you what I really do like about the game. And then don't even get me started about how they call this game an immersive sim. It is absolutely not that. You know what I do like? The name. I think Redfall is a pretty sick name. It's sad that it's associated with this game. This game is absolutely not worth playing and was very disappointing. And our next game is Payday 3. Now this one hurts. I love Payday 2. It's one of my favorite cooperative games, if not like my favorite co-op game ever. I have hundreds of hours in it. I've played these heists a ton of times. I love Payday 2. And so Payday 3, I was pretty hyped for it. I thought it was going to be pretty cool. And unfortunately, this game is just not it. While I wouldn't say Payday 3 is a bad game, I wouldn't say it's a very good game either. And it's a big step backwards from Payday 2 in a couple aspects. Before we even get to the game though, we got to talk about that launch. That launch was just awful. It was one of the worst launches I've ever seen for a video game. Always online is never a good idea, and this game continues to prove why that's not a good idea. You couldn't even play this game in solo. You couldn't play offline. You couldn't play in single player because the servers were just that broken. You would just be stuck loading or connecting, and even nowadays, you'll be sitting there loading longer than you should have, and that's because this game is online only. I don't know why games do this. I'm going to guess it was the publisher, and I just don't know why publishers pull this crap. It's so annoying, but when you actually got to play the game, you realize that yeah, it's not as good as Payday 2. It's not even as good as Payday 2 was at launch, you know? It's one thing to compare Payday 2 nowadays to Payday 3 since it does have 10 years of updates, but even Payday 2 at launch, which I played at launch, I played a ton at launch, to Payday 3, yeah, Payday 3 still doesn't compare. The core gameplay isn't all that different. You're doing heists up to 4 players where you usually got to get some kind of item and bring it back, and you'll shoot a ton of cops along the way, or you can be stealthy. I'll immediately say, the biggest improvement this game has over Payday 2 is the stealth mechanics. The stealth is actually pretty good. It's really involved and there's depth here. The stealth is great, and you can do like every heist stealthy, so that is cool. The game also does look better than Payday 2. And that's really where the positives end. The gunplay is not as good as Payday 2's. The weapons don't feel as nice. There's not as many weapons. There's not as much customization. I don't like the progression of Payday 3. I think Payday 2's was much better and much more intuitive. The interface was a lot more intuitive. In fact, this interface just kind of sucks. The game does not have as much customization. It feels like it doesn't give you enough information sometimes. There's no planning stage. It doesn't tell you what to do in the heist unless you're the one who initiates the heist. The heists themselves are just not as replayable, fun, engaging, interesting, or original as Payday 2's. I don't like stealing crypto. There's also no multi-day heist. There's no massive heist that takes like an hour like there was in Payday 2 at launch, by the way, and it just feels like there's not as much risk versus reward in these heists. I don't think they're anywhere near as rewarding in general. The music, while good, is not as good as Payday 2's, and at this point I'm just like, well, why would I even want to play Payday 3? Genuine question, why would I want to play Payday 3 when Payday 2 exists and is as good as it is and still being updated to this day? Like, why would I go to 3? You know, they've already been updating 3 a bunch. They're adding more and more, and they have all these roadmaps, and they plan to add XYZ, and they even are going to address a bunch of the issues I have with this game. But it's like, okay, at that point, why release the game in this state? Like, it needs so much more work, clearly, that you got to update it for like a year or 2 or 3. Who knows how long it's going to take before this game is in the state we want it to be at Payday 2's launch state minimum. And it's like, why launch the game at that point? Payday 3, pretty big disappointment. One of my biggest disappointments of the year, just because I was expecting more from it. And in the end, yeah, really just goes to show Payday 2 is just kind of goated. And I'll quickly go over our last game, the day before. Now this is a disappointment no matter how you look at it. I didn't honestly think the game was real until it came out, and I kind of wish it wasn't. Like, this entire ordeal with the game, the developer, with the game basically being a scam, but then everyone refunding it, like, it is a story, it is a hoot and a half, as some people would say. It's got to be one of the biggest L's you've seen in the entire gaming industry. I don't have all day to explain all the nuances and details of it. There's plenty of other YouTubers like Young Yeah and Actman who have gone over this extensively. I'm going to just say that this is a fail for all of humanity and a disappointment to anybody who likes video games, and the game probably just should not have come out. It really should have just been canceled, and it would have been better than what we ended up getting. But that is it for today. These were my most disappointing games of the year. If you made it to this part of the video, comment shark as in what my profile picture is. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know down below what you all are thinking if you haven't thrown a pitchfork through my window already. And yeah, have a good Christmas, New Year's, whatever's the closest to you. See y'all later. Bye-bye.